say in the Damascus document, and we were 20 years groping for the way before a righteous teacher arose to help us explain these things. And if you, subtract 20 from 40, you get about, 20 AD, and I would assume the righteous teacher is functioning somewhere in the 40s if he's a James-like person. James takes over the leadership from what we can see here somewhere in the 40s. If I'm going to hook it up with scroll materials, that 20 years of groping makes a lot of sense to me. So those are 2 points in favor of an earlier date. Now, I know what the Gospels give us, but the Gospels may have been written many years later and may have been created by people who knew very little about these things. Yeah?
Could the figure of Stephen,
I don't think Stephen's a real figure. I'll show you that Stephen's a total overwrite for other people. But anyway, what about
No,
Stephen?
just because Paul is presented as
Yeah.
being present at his death,
Yeah.
could that place the date or something?
No, well, I can assure you that Paul wasn't the present from the date of Stephen, and that the only Stephen he knows is a Stephen who was one of his supporters in Corinthians. And I have a feeling that I can explain the Stephen episode to you when we get to it. But I don't think that would help in my... Now, if you said to an Orthodox theologian, oh, yeah, they might say, yes, that might help, because they accept everything as historical in these documents. They don't. You say, well, how do you know? How come you pick and choose? I think we can show that Stephen is not an historical character when we get to him. But I think you have to wait till we get to him. You say, how do you know he's not a historical character? Oh, I think there was a Stephen, but I think Josephus tells the story of Stephen, the emperor's servant Stephen, who was beaten underneath the walls of Jerusalem and robbed because he was on an embassy to Palestine from Corinth, and Jewish revolutionaries attacked him the way our trucks are being attacked in Baghdad and stole all of the treasure and stuff he was bringing to Jerusalem to pay off the officials. I think that's the historical episode that would accord with the Stephen episode in the book of Acts. And I would assume that Stephen is the same person that Paul is referring to in his letters as someone he knows in Corinth and so on and so on. So I think I can reconstruct the historical Stephen for you, but I don't think he's the one. The execution of Stephen is suspiciously like the execution of James. And we'll see in this class, Stephen is stoned the way James is stoned, and certain phrases and things look a lot like the execution of James and so on. And we'll be able to show that Stephen's speech is totally bogus speech, that he never said any of those things, because I can show you the source of the speech in the book of Joshua, and things like that. So you can see where these people crib their information from. But the point about the Stephen episode, which is a very important one, is that the pseudo-Clementine recognitions, which I gave you as an addendum to that packet of materials, actually has an attack on James at the time Acts has an attack on Stephen. So those of us who argue for the unhistoricity of Stephen would say that the book of Acts writers were embarrassed about Paul's attack on James, that's recorded in the pseudo-Clementines in the 40s, where he attacked James, threw him down the steps, and left him for dead, and rather substituted the stoning of James that occurred in the 60s for this attack, and put it in the guise of this Stephen character. But that's a little bit complicated, and you'll have to wait till we go through Acts to do that. So no, I don't think Stephen will help us date the Jesus episode. But look, if you believe in the Orthodox materials and you think they're sound, then you don't have a problem in this regard. It's only the people who do have a problem that this thing about spurious acts can be helpful to them. Now, I'm not saying it is helpful. I don't believe because Eusebius says they're spurious that they necessarily were spurious. Just like I don't believe Scott Peterson when his witness says something up in the trial up there in Northern California. I mean, I don't believe anything that guy says or anything his witnesses say, Although maybe, who knows, he's probably going to get off, but the point being that just because people say something doesn't mean that it's accurate. Okay, so, which it is indeed plain that Pilate was not yet appointed to Judea if Josephus is to be credited, and that is the big if. that Pilate was appointed in the 12th year of his reign, which is 26. And they say that these things happened when again? Let's see. In the 7th year of his reign. So 5 years. They say whatever that the crucifixion of Jesus occurred in 21 AD. And I say our material is so sketchy that it could have been. Do I believe that? Well, only because Paul knows so little about him. That worries me. Paul was functioning in the 30s. I repeat that. Why does he know so little about Jesus? Historically speaking. Why doesn't he tell us? I mean, surely he must know. He must have talked to people. What does he do every day when he's sitting around someone's house eating dinner or something? Surely if he knew other apostles, people who knew Jesus, they would be talking. He'd have all kinds of stories he could tell and everything. Why is there a single story in all of his letters about Jesus? The believer doesn't worry about these things, but I do. Okay, high priest under the Jews. 15th year of Tiberius. A procurator Pilate was procurator. And this is the 30th year of Jesus Christ's life. And so we get some material now. That's really, I don't know what he's talking about here. Who was high priests? And he's saying that the Roman governors who were appointing the high priest at this time, and that is true, they had, since they took the vestments, since Herod took the vestments, they were appointing the high priest, unless there was a Jewish king. The last Jewish king was when? 7 AD, or pseudo-Jewish king, Archelaus. So, since 7 AD and the census, there had not been kings to appoint the high priests, and the governors were doing it. That's one of the big problems in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Why the Dead Sea Scrolls consider the priesthood in Jerusalem illegitimate. I think that the Orthodox scholars say, oh, it's the Maccabees, or illegitimate, but as I've said in other classes, I don't think any Jews thought the Maccabees were illegitimate priests. But they do think the Herodian priests are illegitimate. And I think one of the reasons the scroll people are out in the wilderness, they don't like what's going on in the temple, and they don't like these priests being appointed by Roman governors. And I can understand that. I just have to have a brain to understand why they wouldn't like that. So, he's talking about Caiaphas, who's pictured in the Gospels as someone who's involved in the execution of Jesus, and the different priests that were appointed.